Festivals, experiences, and conventions can be incredible when managed well. There's nothing quite like sharing an epic moment with a crowd of like-minded fans, but sometimes things don't go as planned. Or worse, were cons from the very start. From music festivals where the bands just didn't show up to events whose false advertising backfired badly, these are some live events that exposed huge scams, awful behavior, and ended in huge disasters. Charlie and the Bullshit Factory. When you think of Willy Wonka, what comes to mind? The beloved children's book? One of the whimsical film adaptations? Hopefully not that one. Or is it just a general warm, fuzzy, nostalgic feeling? Well, there are a bunch of kids in Scotland who probably think of betrayal and broken promises, because it's time to talk about the Willy's Chocolate Experience. In 2024, a company called House of Illuminati, run by Billy Cool, decided to cash in on two recent trends: the popularity of the new Wonka movie and free AI image generating software. The company rented out a warehouse in Glasgow, Scotland, and put together material promoting their magical-sounding Willy's Chocolate Experience, an unlicensed event based on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The event's website promised kids would have an unforgettable time, boasting bright AI artwork of candy-covered landscapes. With hindsight, the warning signs are obvious. You should never attend an event that uses this many AI-generated images in their promotional material. If they had something to show you, they'd show you. After paying £35, a little over $43, ticket holders arrived to discover a truly heartbreaking sight. Rather than giant lollipops, colorful gumdrops, and charming candy canes, attendees were greeted by a gray, miserable, barely decorated warehouse. It was nothing like what their promotional imagery had promised. Somehow it got even worse, though. You see, House of Illuminati did hire actual actors like this jolly Oompa Loompa here. However, they were given almost nothing to work with. According to one actor, they were handed scripts composed of AI-generated gibberish that made no sense but were expected to read anyway. How bad could it be? Let's read a bit. One of my most cherished creations, the Anti-Graffiti Gobstopper, a marvel of confectionery science designed to aid, not just any soul, but the tireless guardians of cleanliness, our beloved mums. And yes, dads too, but especially mums, from the endless scourge of dirty socks strewn about by youthful adventurers. Wow, yeah, I'm really losing sleep over this thing taking my job. Despite the shame, many of the actors decided to stick it out in order to try and brighten the kids' day as much as possible, though maybe not all of them should have stayed. One actor had to play a made-up character called the Unknown, who was an evil chocolate maker that lived in the walls. I think I missed that part of the book. Anyway, here's what kids thought of the Unknown.
Oh my God. Scare the great unknown. Wonderful. I love that. Oh, fantastic.
What is that?
Please, pull a scary face of the great unknown.
It's an everlasting gobstopper.
What was that?
Why did he do that?
The event was a massive scam and an obvious case of misleading advertising, to the extent that parents even called the police to the scene. The backlash was so bad that attendees were refunded, and Billy Cool scrubbed all his online data and claimed the event ruined his life. Billy, buddy, the event didn't ruin your life, you did. Nobody forced you to scam people. Billy was also found to have published 17 AI-generated books, including vaccine denial books. Clearly, the tech is not being used by our best and brightest. Poop Stock 99. When you hear Woodstock, what comes to mind? Hippies, peace and love. For me, it's pillars of fire and rivers of poop. To understand why, though, we need to go back in time. The original 1969 Woodstock Festival brought together some of the decade's biggest musicians in the name of peace and to protest the Vietnam War. The festival was revived twice, once in 1994, which suffered from intense mud, and for a final time in 1999. In order to prevent the muddy mistake of '94, organizers picked the perfect new spot for their hippie festival, a former military base. Yeah, just what the original Woodstock hippies envisioned. The venue was chosen due to how dry and arid it was. Of course, the reason it was so dry is because the location was hot with almost no shade. Not the best choice for an entirely outdoor festival, right? While there were public fountains at the event, lines quickly ballooned to insane proportions. To make matters worse, vendors quickly took advantage of the heat and jacked up their prices. A single bottle of water skyrocketed from $4 to $12. That's over $20 today. These kids had already spent a lot of money on tickets, around $160, close to $300 today, and in return the festival was continuing to rinse them for their own profit. This was when tensions began to rise in the crowd, and they weren't helped by the bathroom situation. The public toilets were backed up and unusable after a single day. The paltry medical staff were quickly swamped as over 1,000 ticket holders were treated for heat exhaustion. Attendees went from shouting Kid Rock's name to chanting water in unison. I know that sounds hard to believe, but people really were excited to see Kid Rock once. During Limp Bizkit's set, singer Fred Durst colorfully encouraged the 400,000-odd crowd to let their anger out, lighting the proverbial fuse. The crowd finally exploded into violence when organizers cut Fatboy Slim's set short, probably because it was turning into an orgy or peace and love fest in the crowd. Vigilantes smashed the water pipes leading to the fountains. Water was now readily gushing out for everyone to enjoy, but it wouldn't stop. Soon the water geyser turned the previously stone-dry field into a thick, muddy bog, the exact thing the venue was supposed to prevent. They also let performers know they were upset by pelting them with those expensive bottles. Just look at all that flying plastic. Still, it could have been worse. Singer Sheryl Crow claims she had poop thrown at her while on stage. And she's probably right. You see, and there's no delicate way to say this, the mud that was now everywhere was contaminated with human waste. Yes, you heard that right. The brown stuff everyone was enjoying was, in fact, a fetid cocktail of mud and human excrement from compromised toilets. By day 3, the tired, thirsty, feces-caked crowd finally turned their anger towards the festival itself. Stages that couldn't be smashed were burned to the ground. When the dust settled, Woodstock 99 had claimed 3 lives and caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. In the aftermath, the organizers were sued for negligence, a lawsuit that would go on for over 10 years. They did try to bring Woodstock back in 2019 for the 50th anniversary, but the scandal hangover from Woodstock 99 plus a legal battle costing tens of millions of dollars with key backers made sure Woodstock died in 99. So much for peace and love, I guess. A load of BS. Is there anything more sacred in American culture than football? I mean, there's religion, but come on. I can't watch unpaid teenagers sustain debilitating injuries for my amusement in church. Well, on August 21st, 2021, one televised football game would reach biblical levels of destruction. IMG versus Bishop Sycamore. By the end of the grueling game, IMG humiliated their opponents, winning by a devastating 58-0. If you're wondering how such a dramatic loss is even possible, it's simple. Bishop Sycamore wasn't a real high school. You heard that right. Bishop Sycamore as a learning institution didn't exist. It was the brainchild of Coach Roy Johnson, seen here looking incredibly trustworthy. His whole life, Roy had dreamt of coaching high school football. Sadly, the man kept him from pursuing that dream just because he lacked credentials, skills, or the ability to teach. Roy cooked up a clever plan, though, and by clever, I mean insane. He would start his own high school. But instead of teaching silly things like math, science, or English, his students would play football all day, every day. Shockingly, this plan worked. Despite having no curriculum, teachers, or even permanent grounds, Roy was able to recruit a number of desperate young men to his newly christened Bishop Sycamore High, which, in a beautiful turn of fate, was abbreviated to BS High. Roy cut costs and scammed everyone around him whenever he could. In the documentary BS High, which is a crazy watch, by the way, he recounts how he would phone a grocery store in the morning and place an order for 12 roast chickens. He'd then wait all day and swoop in just before closing time and buy the then heavily discounted chickens to feed his team. For accommodation, Roy maxed out several credit cards, paying for students to stay in a hotel, all the while their parents thinking they were attending a normal high school. It all paid off, however, because after months of grueling training, Roy wrangled a game with the prestigious IMG, and it turned out he'd produced the worst team to ever touch grass. Bishop Sycamore were so bad that even the professional commentators began speculating mid-match as to whether the game was a mistake. To be fair to the players, they were coached by a psychopath who stole their most formative years as part of a personal vision quest. You might not be surprised to hear this, but it turns out Roy had financial troubles and was in debt. Shortly after the IMG game, Roy stepped down as coach of his own fake football team and in 2023 filed for bankruptcy. Still, if there's one thing this story has taught me, it's that you can't keep an American dreamer down. Sorry, I meant schemer. Hopes dashed. While it's past its heyday now, in 2014, Tumblr was hot. The social media website boasted around 34 million active users who generated 100 million posts in the first quarter of that year alone. Sure, half those posts were Sherlock fanfiction, but that still counts. Capitalizing on the site's popularity, some fans decided to put together TumbleCon in its honor. However, it turned out the convention was not sanctioned by Tumblr itself, so it was quickly renamed to DashCon in reference to Tumblr's dashboard, I think? The July Con would feature panels, meet and greets, podcast recordings, and a performance by a Tumblr popular band called Steam Powered Giraffe. Look, 2014 was a very different time, okay? An early ill omen for the convention was the fact that a full year in advance, the organizers put out requests for volunteers. If you worked 20 hours for the convention, for free, you'd get your ticket reimbursed. Well, I suppose it was worth it to see such thrilling talks as British men with cheekbones? Still, they estimated some 5,000 people would turn up, so they put down a partial down payment at Illinois Renaissance Schaumburg Convention Center Hotel, agreeing to pay off the rest of the bill with door sales revenue. Well, July 11th rolled around, and the first day of DashCon, a brilliant success. Sorry, I misread that. It was a horrible failure. They had expected somewhere between 3,000 and 7,000 attendees, and they got just 350. When barely anyone turned up, in line with their policy, the Renaissance demanded the rest of the money they were owed be paid for upfront or they'd close the convention down. So the organizers turned to their attendees, asked for the extra $17,000 they needed to keep DashCon going, and miraculously, frustrated attendees pitched in and raised the requested amount. However, this was only the beginning of the troubles, as attendees soon found out shockingly little was actually on offer at the convention. One key attraction they boasted was the ball pit. While you might imagine a club or disco room filled with colorful balls, the reality is so much sadder. This thing looks like it could fit 2 adults, if they even could stomach the indignity of entering in the first place. To make matters worse, numerous events and panels were just canceled. The popular podcast Welcome to Night Vale assembled at DashCon only to discover the organizers not only hadn't booked rooms for them, but couldn't afford to pay them at all. Frustrated, the crew rightly canceled their performance. However, attendees weren't told this until after they'd waited hours for the show, leading to this moment and one iconic heckle.
1, 2.
Other guests would also pull out, including podcast The Baker Street Babes and Steam Powered Giraffe. No! If you're sad, don't fret. In compensation for the cancellations, attendees were told to claim an extra hour in the ball pit. Hooray! As you can imagine, attendees weren't comforted. Organizers had to formally apologize for the convention being such a catastrophe. It was branded as a total scam, and it quickly became the most memed event of 2014. I'm just sad the world never got to learn about British men with cheekbones. Fired up. Back in 2017, Fyre Festival took the internet by storm, and not in a good way. This was advertised as a luxury island music festival in the Bahamas, which would take place on an island once owned by criminal kingpin Pablo Escobar. It was created by musician Ja Rule and someone named Billy McFarland. The final advertised lineup for Fyre Festival included artists like Pusha T, Blink-182, Lil Yachty, and many more. No steam-powered giraffes, though, sadly. While tickets weren't cheap by any means, they were also suspiciously not cheap for something marketing itself as a luxury holiday festival. $1,500 would cover your flight, accommodation, meals, and tickets. A VIP package for $12,780 included 4 tickets, yacht access, and accommodation in rustic tented spaces. Sounds nice. And the island in the promo certainly is beautiful, albeit just full of beautiful people like supermodels and Instagram stars. Though, as it turns out, the island featured in the promotional material isn't where the festival ended up taking place. This is because the actual owners of the Bahamian island didn't want the fact it was once owned by Pablo Escobar dragged up. But Pablo's name was all over the promotional material, so that deal fell through. Many ticket holders never even discovered this fact, as some flights to the new location, Great Exuma Island, were canceled the night before due to poor weather. As it turns out, they were the lucky ones, as another last-minute cancellation came from the festival caterers because the festival organizers refused to pay their costs. Despite this being a major issue which would usually shut down any other event of this scale, the organizers figured they could still go ahead. But even that wasn't the worst of it. They hadn't factored in the customs weight on all the equipment they were shipping into the island, so all the trailers for toilets, showers, and water stations wouldn't get to the island in time. The items they did manage to get there, Billy hadn't paid his tax on. Why? Well, the organizers had blown the majority of their budget months before on yachts, supermodels, and Instagram-sponsored posts. One report claimed $1.2 million alone went towards the services of Bella Hadid, Shanina Sheikh, and Hailey Bieber, who were just some of the many models featured in the festival's advertisements. And so, with no money to pay for, well, anything else, the first kids started arriving on the island, and it took them all of 10 seconds to realize they'd been scammed good. Remember those fancy-sounding rustic tents? Well, turns out that was a fancy-sounding way of saying they were staying in disaster relief tents. The kids immediately noticed some of these tents didn't even have beds in them, and there was no water at the water stations. Not good. They were then told the tents didn't have reservations on them, so it was a free-for-all. Oh, and that luxury food and fine dining they were promised? Well, with no caterers, instead the organizers had to rely on any islander who would help them. And so the guests were served what appears to be a plain cheese sandwich, and no water. Now is a very good time to remember that some attendees paid over $12,000 to be here. Although by this point I'd want relief from this disaster, so maybe those tents were a good choice after all. But as bad as this looks, it wasn't the worst of it. When it became clear the event was shaping up to be a disaster, every single artist pulled out. And yet the organizers still tried to continue with it. It wasn't until Bahamian authorities stepped in after Billy failed to pay tax on more of the imported items he'd littered the area with and shut the festival down after less than a day. Not long after the failed fest, Ja Rule denied any culpability for the event, instead shunting the responsibility onto Billy. For his part in defrauding investors and lying whilst he was under investigation, Billy was sentenced to 6 years in prison. While he's out now, he owes investors, ticket holders, and vendors $26 million, and his earnings will theoretically be garnished until it's all paid back. Happy ending? Well, because we live in an irony-poisoned hellscape, a sequel to the failed festival is currently in the works. People, please remember, you can spend your money on good things. Balloonscape. Pack your bags, kids. We're going to the most magical place on Earth, Cleveland. What, did you think I was going to say Disney World? Well, to explain the confusion, let's head back to the 1980s where the city of Cleveland was in a rough shape. It was facing a declining population and a terrible public image as somewhere dirty and depressing, having endured the brutal nickname of the Mistake on the Lake since the 1930s. In 1986, city officials decided the best way to put Cleveland on the map was balloons. The previous year, Disneyland earned the record for the largest simultaneous balloon launch, releasing 1 million balloons into the air. Partnering with nonprofit United Way, the city of Cleveland decided to put that smug mouse in his place. Over the course of several days, thousands of Clevelandians gathered beneath a 2-story tall container made from mesh and scaffolding. There they inflated balloon after balloon until a towering mountain of 1.5 million colorful latex orbs hovered over the city. Take that, Mickey! On September 27th, the city ecstatically watched as they released those balloons into the air, setting a world record in the process. Hardly seems like a disaster at all, does it? Well, unfortunately for Cleveland, time moves forward and perfect moments cannot linger forever. You see, while a lot of thought had been put into releasing the balloons, it turned out absolutely no thought had been put into what would happen after. Many of the popped and destroyed balloons littered the streets and waterways of Cleveland, causing disarray and multiple traffic accidents. The drifting balloons also caused major trouble at nearby Burke Lakefront Airport, forcing it to close down. Considering most balloons take upwards of 2 years to biodegrade, they weren't an easy cleanup. Worse still, thousands of balloons drifted downwards onto the nearby Lake Erie, and this is the point where it turned from farce to tragedy. The day of the event, 2 fishermen, Raymond Broderick and Bernard Sulzer, went missing. When the Coast Guard searched for someone presumably tossed overboard, what do you think they looked for? Usually, the first thing you spot is their head bobbing in the water. Look at this footage. Could you tell a human being bobbing in the water from a balloon? How about from a distance? Sadly, amongst the balloons, the Coast Guard were unable to find the missing fishermen, and their bodies washed ashore some days later. While there's no way of knowing whether the men would have been found if not for the balloons, one of the wives of the deceased sued United Way, and the case was settled on undisclosed terms. Several other lawsuits levied against the city ranged from everything to reckless endangerment to the permanent injury of horses, costing it a multiple $1 million figure. Talk about a mistake on the lake. Oof, that joke was a lot darker out loud than it was on paper. My bad. Fursecution. If you aren't familiar with furries, I'm sorry I have to do this, but let me give you a crash course. Furries are people who enjoy and sometimes make costumes based on anthropomorphized animals, which is to say animals with human characteristics. Like walking on two legs, talking, going into debt, as one of these suits costs roughly $10,000, you know, regular human stuff. While furry conventions have actually been around since the late 1980s, as this footage from 1989's Conference Zero proves, only one of the following cons has been truly dangerous. In 2014, Anthrocon was held in Hyatt Regency O'Hare Hotel in Chicago. Furries flocked to the event to share art, appreciate each other's costumes, enjoy a furry DJ set, however that sounds, and mingle with other like-minded eccentrics. However, not long into the convention, guests began complaining of head and stomach aches, and it wasn't just all the kibble they were eating. Before long, 19 furries, some still in costume, were being rushed to the hospital in dire condition. The hotel staff acted quickly, suspecting a gas leak was to blame. They rounded attendees up and ushered them to a safe venue across the street, which was, amusingly, hosting a dog show at the time. One attendee stated their phone blew up with concerned messages from friends and family asking if she was okay, which then quickly turned into asking why she was at a furry convention. Awkward. Unfortunately, the story doesn't stay funny for long. You see, investigators found that rather than a gas leak, the culprit was chlorine powder that was very likely intentionally left in the hotel's stairwell, meaning the incident was likely an anti-furry hate crime. Creepier still, the FBI and counterterrorism agents investigated the incident but never made any arrests. All these years later, the culprit has never been found. Still, it sounds like a pretty good setup for a new buddy cop movie. Diaper Fest 2015. If the tragic tale of the Anthrocon attack got you feeling sympathetic for furries, just wait until you hear this next story. Of all the furry conventions, none are as infamous as Rainforest 2015. The convention was held between the 24th and 27th of September at the Seattle Airport Hilton, and while many of the events we've discussed thus far were disasters due to poor management and planning, the Rainforest 2015's demise was down to its guests. The con started off normal, but as the weekend progressed, attendees gave in to their inner animals, descending into full-on debauchery and destruction. Enjoy the dancing furry, it's the most wholesome this'll get. Things began with small acts of vandalism. An elevator was put out of order by guests forcing their way in. Several guests purposefully clogged the hot tub's pump with rolled-up towels, rendering it unusable and requiring thousands of dollars to repair. A toilet in the hotel lobby was destroyed, unleashing a wave of toilet water 2.5 inches deep. The acts of incivility only grew bolder and more flagrant. According to hotel staff, some attendees began plastering their doors with posters depicting, let's just say, imagery you wouldn't want Grandma seeing on her way to breakfast. It only got worse from there, as attendees began openly engaging in crinkling, which is the act of, oh my god, wearing adult diapers and squirming around because you like the crinkling sound it makes. And after a while, without any repercussions, crinkling alone wasn't enough. Those diapers didn't stay dry, folks. Some attendees began filling them. And once they were filled, well, they didn't put them in trash cans, I can tell you that. They were left on cars and parking lots and stairwells. If that was happening in public, imagine what was going on in the guest rooms. Actually, let's not. Trying their absolute best to maintain an air of professionalism, the Hilton eventually put up flyers insisting that they return to what they called normal operating procedures. But this still wasn't the worst of it. Once the convention was over, the Hilton sent a letter to the organizers detailing just some of the damage, as well as multiple incidents of illicit substance use on site. And not little incidents. Some of these involved police and paramedics to intervene. Now, Rainforest had insurance which covered all the expense and damage costs, so the Hilton didn't lose any money, and Rainforest paid the Hilton around $1 million to host them. But the Hilton found all this behavior so dangerous and abhorrent, they cut ties with Rainforest as soon as they could. 2015's Rainforest garnered such an awful reputation because big hotel chains talked to one another that the convention, which had been running since 2007, was never able to find a venue willing to host it on the West Coast again. Gee, I wonder why. Boy, those were some disastrous events. Have you ever attended something that turned out to be awful or worse, a scam? What was it like? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.